What's up guys, this is Voxside and welcome to part 2 of creating a Shuriken animation inside Cinema 4D and After Effects. So this is where we left off in part 1 with which covered the modeling of the actual Shuriken. And in this part I'm gonna be animating the Shuriken and the camera as well, render our passes, and then in the final part we will export all of our passes to After Effects and add some fog with particular and some other effects. So let's get started with animating this Shuriken first. So the first thing I'm gonna do here is I'm gonna set my timeline to be 160 frames, which is roughly 5 seconds, and also press Ctrl B, and let's set our width and height for our project to our resolution at which we will be rendering at, so 1080p in this case. And let's go ahead and I will grab this Shuriken group here, so the group that has all of our objects, and what I want to do is just simply animate this from on the x-axis from one side to another, right? So what I'm gonna do here is I'm actually just gonna drag this guy over, set a keyframe on the x coordinate, and then move to my 160 frames, so the end of the timeline, and just move this forward a bit and just set another keyframe, and I'm just creating a simple linear animation here. Alright, and if I play this out and see how this looks, well, it's looking pretty good. Let's press Shift and F3, and this will give me my timeline window. Drop our Shuriken, and let's go to our position, and let's set this to be our F-curve mode, so we can see the curve of our keyframes. And let's go ahead and actually let's leave this as it is for now. So what I want to do is have this animation, right? And then at around frame 35, I want to slow down our Shuriken. So up until frame 35, I want the Shuriken to go at the normal velocity. At frame 35, I want the velocity to slow down and just sort of create that slow motion effect. And then the slow motion effect should last around up until 110 frame. And then it slowly revs up and gains the original speed back. Alright, so how can we do this? Well, let's just simply create a keyframe at frame 35 for where our Shuriken is at. So just press Ctrl, and this will create another keyframe. Let's move over to frame maybe 120 and set another keyframe, right? So we have 4 keyframes to work with now, and if I press Shift and F3, I can now use these keyframes to control this curve. So let's make sure all of our handles have ease. So you can select the handles and press this button here, which will give them the ease. And now I can just grab the handles and just reshape this curve to have that slow motion effect. So I'm pretty much just gonna increase the distance travel between the first 2 keyframes and the last keyframes. So here's what I mean. I can just drag this guy up, and I will drag this guy down. And you can kind of see what I'm doing here and the shape that our curve is starting to have. And I can grab these handles and just make sure that everything is nice and smooth. Right, so this is pretty much how our curve should look like, right? It goes up fast and then it slows down in the middle here, and then it goes up fast again, right? And the result of this will be something like this. Right, so slow motion effect over here, and then it starts to rev up towards the end, right? And if I want to increase the overall distance traveled by this disk, I can grab this. I'm not sure if you can see this, but there's a dotted red line over here, and if I grab this line, you can see the cursor changes, and if I grab this line and just drag this up, this will increase all of our values incrementally. And we are sort of maintaining the same consistency between the keyframes and just increasing the overall distance traveled. And you can see how this trajectory line changes in the viewport. And if I press play again, now we're just traveling a greater distance and just overall creating in a more sped up effect. Alright, so that's it for the first part of this animation, and let's actually animate our blades coming up now and then take care of the rotation. So let's grab all of these blades, go to my user data, and let's see, maybe at around frame 30 I will set a keyframe for rotation to be at, let's see, let's increase these guys here, and I will actually turn off subdivision surface just because we won't need this and it just slows down our viewport. So I'm just increasing the rotation for my user data here until our blades are inside the disk. Set a keyframe with control and then move forward, maybe frame 60. We can always just adjust this later, and then let's set the keyframe back to 0% and add another keyframe. Alright, and now our blades are coming up. Let's actually maybe increase this distance a bit to frame 80 maybe. Alright, so this will be the result so far. And now I want to animate the disk actually rotating, and I'm gonna use this subdivision group for this. So I want to keep the Shuriken group just controlling the actual movement, and then I'm gonna use the subdivision group to control the rotation. So if I go to the subdivision control here, I can see that our rotation B is the parameter that I want to be affected, or the coordinate, whichever way you want it. Alright, so set this back to 0, and I can see that I have to go in a negative direction to rotate this properly. So let's set this back to 0. Let's go to frame 0 here and set a keyframe for, let's try the 0 degrees for now. And if I go over to frame 160, I'm gonna do the same thing and just give it an initial value, so maybe negative 2000. And if I play this back now, our disk is rotating, and we just have to create that slow motion effect that we created with our movement. So if I press Shift and F3, I can go ahead and drop this subdivision guy inside the timeline, go to the rotation, and now I want to create another 2 keyframes. So you can hold Control and just left click on your curve, and this will create a new keyframes. And then I can just drag this down and just try to recreate the same curve that we had earlier for the movement, only just in reverse. So if I also grab the position, so you can hold Control, and if I click position, this will also show the curve for my position. And now all I have to do is simply match these keyframe positions, right? So I have to drag this guy a bit to the right here, and also this guy a bit to the right, and maybe I will increase the overall value or rotation by using this line towards the bottom. You can see how the cursor changes when I edit the overall values. And let's also make these 2 keyframes, so the first and the last one, give them the ease, and just adjust the handles. Just you can kind of see what kind of curve I'm going for here. Alright, and maybe this will be fine for now. Let's take a look how this will be. Press play, and we got a slow motion effect for the rotation as well now, and just continues over and revs up towards the end. And this will be actually pretty fine for now. Let's go ahead and I will drop a matrix object, and for my matrix object I'm gonna set the generate to be thinking particles, and I'm just gonna drag these out, and I'm gonna use this as a reference to sort of get a better idea on the spacing and how this will look inside After Effects with our clouds. So just think of these particles as a placeholder for our smoke, right? And this just will help me get a better grasp of how the actual 3D feel to it. So I'll show you what I mean in a second. So I'm just trying to sort of fill out the space that this disk is traveling, and this will be fine. And I can also go ahead and let's drop a random effector, set the matrix object to have the random effector, so which it has. Alright, and go inside my matrix object and let's set the particle priority after effector, and now inside the random effector I can increase this strength and sort of just add some randomness to our particles. Alright, and let's just see this. And yeah, this matrix object, so these particles will just help out with our camera animation. Speaking of which, let's drop a camera, so let's go to, and let's create a target camera actually, and This will be fine for now. Let's go ahead and drop a circle object, a circle spline rather, and I will flip this 90 degrees and just scale this up a bit maybe. And now for this camera I want to add a align to spline tag and just set the spline path to be our circle. Right, and our camera target is in the center of our scene, which is good. And let's increase the size a bit for this circle. And now you can see I can use this circle spline to sort of create our orbiting animation. And I will also drop a new null object, which will be also in the center of our scene. Let's rename this to camera rig. And then grab all of these objects so the circle, the camera, and the camera target, and place them inside our camera rig. And now if I move this camera rig null, you can see that the whole setup follows this rig. And now this camera rig, I want to make a child of our Shuriken group so that this whole setup will be right on top of our disk at all times. Alright, and let's see what I mean by this. Let's go to the beginning of the timeline at frame 0, and if I take a look at the Shuriken null object, I can see that the X value for this guy is negative 4000 blah blah blah. I'm just gonna copy this value, so Control C, go to my camera rig and paste it for its X coordinate. And this will just place our camera rig right in the center of our object, alright? And if I place this camera rig now inside the Shuriken group, so make it a child of the Shuriken group, now you can see that the camera will always stay on top of our Shuriken, which is what we want. Alright, so this is the first part of the camera animation, and let's actually just go to my circle object here and go to coordinates and just give this some nice rotation and have a more interesting angle here. And if I go inside my camera view now, you can see that as I press play, here will be our camera animation. Alright, so not bad. And you can see that if I don't have the matrix object, so if I turn this off, or actually let's just hide this and let's see. Alright, so the particles still stay, but without this matrix object, it would be pretty hard to tell exactly what's going on with the camera. So these particles just give us a nice reference for the speed and sort of like the spacing of the scene. Let's go to our camera and go to Object tab here, and let's increase the field view, and just this will sort of give it a forced perspective and just create a more dynamic look. And also I can grab this circle object now, and if you can see that as I move it, I can just create more interesting angles here, and this will be fine. The only thing now is that I have to increase the radius here to compensate for the perspective increased perspective. Alright, and let's take a look here. Now I want to adjust the rotation for the disk a bit, and if I press Shift F3 and go to let's go to our Shuriken. Alright, so this is the rotation for our Shuriken here, and I just want to move this line here that controls all of the values and move it a bit until the Shuriken is rotated in the spot where I want it to match our camera angle. Alright, so you can also do that. So something like this, and let's go ahead and grab this subdivision guy, which is our rotation. Let's just rename this to rotation, actually. Will be a lot easier. And the Shuriken I can just rename to movement, right? So we have our movement and rotation, our two main ingredients for this whole animation. So going back to my rotation coordinates here, I can also increase the other parameters for the rotation as well, and just create a nice angle that you've seen in the preview. Maybe decrease the radius for my circle, which has the camera, and I can also adjust the camera target a bit, just maybe bring it down a bit so the whole thing is more centered. Let's maybe press Shift F3 and increase this rotation even more, so maybe have it spread out faster. Alright, and just try to match the angle and give it a nice dynamic feel, and maybe go back in my rotation here and just play around with these settings. Maybe also go to my circle, which of my circle for the camera, and I can also adjust this. Alright, so I know that this angle right here is gonna be probably the most important angle in this shot, so I'm gonna base all of the rest of the animation on this angle. Alright, this looks fine. Actually, maybe let's increase the field of view maybe even more. Go to our circle radius, and this will be fine actually. Pretty satisfied with this. Alright, and I think the only thing left to do now is rotate the camera around this disc. And if I step outside of my camera view, the camera rotating should look something like this. So if I select my circle and go to coordinates, and let's maybe set a keyframe at frame 40 for my rotation B here, and then at frame, let's move at frame 120, and I want this camera to rotate around our object like so. Let's set another keyframe maybe around negative 246 degrees, and this will be how this looks from our perspective view. I just want the camera to, so the initial rotation for the camera, so the first half of this camera rotation, just want it to be a lot less. So I want to slow this down and then rev it up towards the end, and I'm actually just gonna move this from 120 frame to 160, so we just keep it nice and clean. So we have this camera rotation, and let's press Shift and F3. Let's drop this circle here and go to my rotation. And here's what I want to do. I'm going to select the first keyframe here, and I will select this handle and hold Control and just move this out a bit and just scale this out. And now you can see that our initial rotation will start off a lot slower, just rev up towards the end here. Alright, so something like this is how it should look like. And let's just see how this looks in our camera view. So press play. Alright, and it slowly turns out, and then, well, we need some adjustments still. Let's maybe increase the overall rotation for this. But this is actually not bad at all. This is very close to my original look, and I'm not gonna recreate the exact same effect because there's simply a lot of tweaking going around. And you can download the original project file and see exactly how the setup, how I did the setup there, right? But this is sort of like the gist of it. And also I need to animate the circle's radius. So at around frame 80, I'm gonna set the keyframe for the radius, and then as the camera turns around, I also want to zoom out of my object here. So just add another keyframe for my radius, and I can also adjust this later. And also at the beginning of my timeline, I also want to zoom out here and create another keyframe for my radius. And if I drop the radius, or actually we already have the radius option here, you can kind of see this is how the curve looks like. And I just want to adjust these handles a bit. So I want the radius to have a, this is where the slow motion region occurs. So I want the radius to have this nice smooth transition here. And then I just wanted to rev up towards the end. And maybe this will be fine. Let's take a look. Alright, so it zooms in, then it sticks for a while, and as the camera turns around, everything falls into place. Maybe the rotation, I can maybe, so the circle rotation, I'll just try to end this a little sooner. Let's see what we can do here. So just try to fade the rotation out towards the end, and maybe this will look better, I don't know. Alright, so this is closer to the original look. So the rotation stops a little more ahead of the zooming. Alright, and this will be fine, I think. This is pretty much it. The only thing you can still do is actually if you go to your rotation, You can also set some keyframes for the other rotation coordinates. And actually I know I want the rotation P to be at this angle at around, let's say at around frame 80. I want the rotation to have this P value, and then I can set the initial P value to be something more like -35, and you can see that you can also use the other coordinates to create some other effects. But overall, this will be the final result. And like I said earlier, you can download the project file, the original project file, and see exactly how that project is laid out and all the exact values and settings. Alright, but this will be fine for now, so you can press Ctrl B and just make sure you have all frames selected here and save it out, and then we can import it in the next part and work from there. Hey, what's up guys, this is Voxside and welcome to part 3, which will be the final part of creating a Shuriken animation inside Cinema 4D and After Effects. So in this final part we will be importing our renders and creating some fog with using the Trapcode particular, going over some color correction tips, just overall putting everything together and creating the final look. Alright, and something I forgot to mention in the second part is when you go to render your project, make sure you check on subdivision surface because we unchecked that previously. And when you press Ctrl B to create your render, just something to keep in mind is that I used a normal render, so I just rendered this as it is, and then I rendered another pass with motion blur. So if you go in your physical tab here, you can turn on motion blur, and I created another pass using motion blur. So let me show you what I mean. If I go inside After Effects and let's drop my original pass here. Alright, so here is just a standard render without the motion blur, and then I have another render which has motion blur. So if I solo this, you can see that this guy is with motion blur. And the only problem here is that I don't really want motion blur at this slow motion segment of the render. So what I can do is just simply cut this, and if you press Ctrl Shift D, you can cut the layer, and I can just simply fade this out and fade it in towards the end here. So you can see now that at the beginning of our animation we have that motion blur, and then here it cuts off. So this is our motion blur layers. So it cuts off here and uses the original render with no motion blur, and then it just adds the motion blur back. Alright, and I just want to fade these layers in and out by using the opacity value. So I'm going to set a keyframe for opacity at 0 to 100% for motion blur. And as this motion blur transitions in, I want the original layer to transition out. So set a couple of keyframes here and just fade this out, right? And maybe move these over a bit. So now this will be the result. All right, and do the same for the beginning part. So add another keyframe here and fade this out, and also just fade this base layer in. Right, so we have some motion blur here, then it fades out, no motion blur, and then motion blur back again. And you can readjust these layers as much as you want here, and the keyframes as well, until you get the result that you're looking for. All right, so that's just something that I forgot to mention in the first part. So you need two passes, one just a regular render and one with motion blur. And now I can simply grab all of these layers, press Ctrl Shift C to pre-compose, and this will be my Shuriken. Just name this to Shuriken. Alright, and let's rename this composition to main render. And let's go ahead and press Ctrl Y and just create a simple background for now and go to generate ramp. Let's switch the ramp to a radial ramp, move these points around a bit, and maybe let's set the second color to black and add a nice blue for my first color. Just give it a nice base color for our background. Alright, so something like this. Let's go ahead and add a color correction curves to this Shuriken layer and just lower the brightness for this layer. Just created that nice dark effect. Maybe raise up the contrast a bit. Alright, so something like this should be fine. Actually, what I did in the original project was I duplicated this layer, and if I solo this guy, I want to crank up the contrast even more. Alright, so something like this, and I can go ahead and add a stylized glow to this and just increase the glow radius and maybe decrease the threshold. And if I unsolo this and set this to add, you can kind of see now we are overlaying some highlights on our original mesh layer. Right, this is obviously too much, so I can go ahead and just decrease the overall opacity. And let's maybe add a little bit more brightness to this layer. Alright, so something like this will be fine. Let's go ahead and maybe desaturate this blue a bit. So something like this. So now we need our camera from Cinema 4D, and you can go ahead in your Cinema 4D and press Ctrl B. Go to your output settings and make sure all frames is selected, and in your save option here, if you go to Compositing project file, make sure you include 3D data. And if you go here to your save project file, you can just give it a name. Let's cam_1 and press enter and give it a second, and this will now generate a camera that you can import inside After Effects. Alright, so just a quick note, if you've never used the Cinema 4D camera for After Effects before, you will need a plugin for After Effects which you can find for as a free download on Maxon's site, and if you go to the download section you will find it under plugins for After Effects. You just need to choose the compatibility, and this will just give you a plugin which you have to place in your plugins folder for After Effects, and then you can import the camera inside After Effects. So if I step inside After Effects here, I already imported my camera here, but you can just go ahead and double click for import, and you can see here that the camera file will be a .aec file. So you just have to import that, double click, and this will give you a new folder with a new composition, and inside this composition you will be able to find your camera and also whatever passes you rendered from that project. So I just want to copy this camera, so Ctrl C, go in my main render, Ctrl V to paste, and now I have successfully imported the camera from Cinema 4D. And if I press Ctrl Y, and this will be our fog layer, and let's add our Trapcode particular effect. You can kind of see some particles over here, and it's following the camera, but we need to set up our particular first. So let's go ahead and make this a box emitter. Let's set the coordinates, all of them to 0. Set the velocity and all these velocity settings to 0 for now, and just let's increase the emitter size X, and you can see our particles are starting to show now, and just increase these the size here for our emitter. Alright, and let's take a look. And you can see that it properly follows our camera, and it's looking fine. Let's maybe increase the size even more. So I'm actually holding shift while dragging these values, and this will sort of use higher increments instead of having to just drag out the values out forever. Using shift will use higher increments, and using control will use smaller increments when you adjust the values. Let's place this fog above our background and below our Shuriken. And let's actually just go ahead and adjust the particles now. Let's increase the size. Let's set this to be a cloud-led texture and decrease the opacity. Increase the size random. Alright, so getting closer. Let's also go to our emission extras and set the pre-run to 100. Alright, so now we already have particles on our screen at the beginning of the animation. Let's maybe decrease the overall opacity here, set this to 50. And this is getting close to our original look. Maybe increase the size even more, maybe decrease the particles per second to 70. Also, some adjustments you can do here. You can see that we're having this big particle right here that's covering the screen. You can go to your visibility tab here, and you can increase the near vanish. So if I increase the near vanish, you can see that this will get rid of our particles that are really close to the camera. And I can also increase the near start fade to, and this near start fade will try to sort of not cut out the particles abruptly, and will just fade them out towards the camera, just create a more smoother effect. And you can see here that our particles are just getting really far from the camera, and you can increase the emitter size. Only that now that the emitter size is increased, we will sort of have to compensate by using more particles. And you can see that some particles are popping up and off the screen. And you can change this by going to opacity over life. And I just want to use this smooth gradient here. And this will just fade our particles in and out rather than just cutting them off the screen from one frame to another. And now I just have to increase the particles per second here because we've increased the emitter size. And maybe also increase the size a bit. Let's decrease this. Let's set this to 170. Alright. Alright, so this is pretty much the look I'm going for. Maybe set the opacity to 40%. And this will actually be fine. I can also add an adjustment layer. So let's go to layer, adjustment layer. And let's add the curves to this layer and just drop the overall brightness a bit. I just kind of want this fog to just fill out the screen a bit, so just add an interesting background first of all, and then I just want to use them as a reference for spatial awareness sort of. So without, if I take off the fog and just leave this as it is, you can't really feel the 3D as much. So with the particles on, this will sell the effect of actual 3D a lot more. And I can duplicate this fog layer, and let's place this above all of our layers, and let's rename this layer to embers. Alright, let's set this layer to add, and let's solo this. Let's set the opacity to 100%. Let's drop the size maybe to 5. Let's set the opacity for the layer back to 100%. Alright, and maybe set the size to 3, and let's set the type to sphere. Let's set the color to a nice saturated orange here, and this can be used as a layer to just add some embers to our scene as well. So just this will sort of play out as a maybe like a splash of color to just compensate a little bit of all this grayness. Let's go ahead and set the size to 4 maybe, and let's add a stylized glow. No, reduce the threshold here. Maybe actually duplicate this glow and increase the radius for the second glow and decrease the threshold. Alright, and if I duplicate this layer, I'm actually want to use a different random seed for this layer, so you can see that it's generating particles right on top of our clouds, and we just need to change the random seed here. Alright, and I'm just gonna copy this for our first layer as well. Alright, looking fine. Let's maybe delete the second layer and just take care of one layer and then duplicate it back. So I want to increase or rather decrease the far vanish here. I don't want to see as many particles that are too far away. So you can kind of see what this does. It cuts the particles in the back. Alright, so this will be fine. I also think I need some motion blur for this, so go to your rendering. Let's enable motion blur. And this is obviously a little too high. Let's maybe set the shutter angle to 80. Alright, so now we have just a bit of a motion blur. And now I can, let's maybe set this to 3, the size. And duplicate this layer. And this will be our amber layer. Alright, and in the original animation I also have this part in the end where these claw transitions the first animation to just a simple text animation, and you can check out. I'm also gonna include the After Effects project files and you can check them out and see exactly how this part was made. The only other thing that I want to go over is some color correction, and let's go ahead and add a adjustment layer to this. And let's add a curves and let's raise the brightness just a bit. And you can also go to your blue channel here, and I always love to do this. I'm just grabbing the end of this curve and just raising it up, and this will just increase our blue shadows and create this nice soft blue effect. And one other thing you can do is you can increase the red highlights. So I'm just gonna grab this by the start of the curve here and just increase the highlights a bit, and also go to my green channel and maybe increase the green tones just a bit. You can also use a color correction color balance, and if I turn off the curves you can also do this by using the color balance, and this might be a little more exact. So you can go to your shadow blue balance and you can increase this from here, and you can kind of see what this does. You can also increase the green balance, maybe the mid-tone green balance, and the highlight red balance. And this is doing exactly the same thing that I did earlier with the curves, only you might have a little more control. So this is one way to do it with the color balance, but I like doing it with curves. It's just a little bit more easier to adjust. So that's pretty much it for color correction, and just go ahead and download the project files and check out the original project and how everything is laid out here. But that was pretty much all I wanted to cover with this tutorial. Hope you guys enjoyed it, hope you learned anything new. In case you did learn anything new, don't forget to drop a like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more tutorials, and I'm out.